It's the Awake Space Astrology Podcast. I'm Laurie Rivers, your host, here to help you with some inspiration to get those aspirations out into the world. Okay, Mars is direct, Venus is about to go retrograde, and we've got a new moon in Pisces. And we are talking about Octavia Butler, Jim Lewis, and Rosa Parks in this episode of the Awake Space Astrology Podcast. It's interesting times we live in, and I'm giving you the level best strategies I can to move with the energy. So grab your tea, grab your hot coffee, grab your hot cocoa, grab whatever it is you're drinking today, and hold on. It's a gentle ride this week. At least here on the Awake Space Astrology Podcast. I can't guarantee what's going on in the outside world, but I can definitely guarantee that this should be an inspiring episode. I do have some good news to share. I found out after I finished recording everything here in the podcast, because I always record the intro last. I made a prediction for 2025 that scientists would start harvesting water out of humid air. And thanks to Sabrina in the Patreon for posting a news article about scientists starting to harvest fog, using fog to create drinking water. And that was one of the good predictions I had for 2025. And I think in a year as intense and interesting as this one, it's really nice to have predicted something good. Let's get on with the episode. Hey, can you feel it? Mars station direct on Sunday, February 23rd. It is not in direct motion just yet. It appears to be standing still in the sky. Remember, the retrograde cycle, which includes stations, is an optical illusion. It's not really happening from an astronomical level, but it is an optical illusion that we witness as human beings. Why would we even pay attention to it if that's the case? Well, our perceptions shape our reality, and we live on this planet. And when we look up at the sky with our naked eye, that's what we see it doing. If we were on the International Space Station orbiting the planet, we wouldn't notice things as retrograde. The more you know. A lot of times they use information like that to try to debunk astrology. And yet astrology is a framework that explains how we're responding to the world around us, our environment. And as human beings, we have a very Earth-centric point of view. We don't have a heliocentric point of view or the perspective from being on the sun. We aren't out in the Milky Way outside of this planet. We live on this small blue marble, this rock floating in space. And that is from our perception of living here with our particular form of gravity, with our particular atmosphere that shapes our reality. And so that, my friends, is why as a Western tropical astrologer, we pay attention to retrogrades. And at this moment, it appears like Mars has stopped. And I talked about that in the patron-only presentation on Mars Direct and what you can do with that energy. That's a free presentation I gave to all members, free included. You can check out the link in the show notes if you want to check that out. Because, you can still use this energy of Mars Direct for quite some time, especially through this week, but throughout March into April. Because Mars is not going to be leaving Cancer until April 21st when it enters Leo. That's a whole nother kettle of fish that we'll talk about on another episode. Something else is happening this week. Venus is slowing in its pre-retrograde phase because it's going retrograde on March 1st. And I'm sure the internet is full of people talking about how, don't manifest, don't cut your hair, don't do these things. Well, Venus is retrograde, and that's a bunch of poppycock. Venus retrograde is giving us another opportunity to slow the heck down. You've probably noticed that people who are acting rashly are shaking things up in a strange and interesting way out in the outer world. Well, there's some good news around that. Things that happen during retrogrades that are not something you've been working on previously, so you didn't try it before or weren't in process of it before, tend to have a way of falling apart or not working out once everything starts going direct. So there's some of that. We could see some economic shakeups with Venus stationing retrograde and moving retrograde over the next couple of weeks. It's moving back from Aries into Pisces. So I think we're going to see some more and interesting wet weather show up as we move through March. Once it hits Pisces. But it doesn't mean anything bad for you. Retrograde does not mean bad. And by the way, I gave a really in-depth introduction to retrogrades where I literally showed it on the screen using my astrology software, animating the chart so you could see, what happens before the retrograde, what happens at station, what happens when it moves direct. And so that it gave you a visual. So if you've been trying to wrap your head around retrogrades and what it really means, head over to the Patreon. Retrograde doesn't mean bad. Direct doesn't mean good. Okay, so having a couple of planets retrograde at any one time, it actually is a lot more comfortable energy than when we have absolutely everything direct. Now, this Mars retrograde was kind of a slog. The energy was really, really heavy. Talked about this throughout February. It was exhausting energy. You may have felt fatigued, bone weary, soul weary. I know I did. Okay. It's not a blame thing. And if you didn't, yippee, glad. But it was meant to slow us down to using our energy for the most essential things. Okay. The most essential things. Venus stationing retrograde is making us really, really think about what matters to us. It's giving us a time to reconsider, to really feel into our basic needs. Having Venus in Aries already, because it's been there for 2 weeks almost. Having Venus in Aries has made us all think about what really matters to us. Venus is so much more than romance and hearts and flowers and chocolate and, appearance and what shade of makeup you like or your personal style. It really has to do with what makes us feel satisfied, what makes us feel secure. And some of that is love and money. Those are all resources, right? We use money to get the resources that make us feel secure. Love is a resource. And yeah, money sometimes does play into that. People like to pretend it doesn't, but if you're starving and it's hard to take care of each other, the fights start, don't they? Don't they? Very rarely does it not. And you say, but unconditional love. Well, Venus ain't unconditional. Venus is all about if you want a J-O-B, or if you want to be with me, you need a J-O-B, period. You want unconditional love, you got to head over to Neptune. Or when Venus is in Pisces. And it's about looking at the conditions which connect us. Okay. I've been hearing some beautiful stories all over the internet about people who are making sure people get food. So I was on Blue Sky and somebody posted that in their neighborhood, in their Buy Nothing group, somebody was making a bunch of lasagnas every Friday and posting in the Buy Nothing group, hey, just pick it up. No questions, no strings. Grab your lasagna. That's huge. That's huge. That's community. That's unconditional. I've made this. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you got. I don't care what your circumstances. It's available. They're there as long as they're there. When they're gone, that's it. That's unconditional. Learning to let go of outcomes to find our baseline of security. How do you secure yourself while being in community with others? That's very, very important. And that includes our energy levels. What enlivens me? What depletes me? Where do I feel like I have the resources to be supportive? And what kind of support do I need in order to feel resourced? Those are all things we're going to be thinking about as Venus is retrograde, as we all adjust in these very interesting times. And I'd love to say they won't get more interesting. They probably will. And we're going to have to navigate these things as best we can. As best we can. I'm trying to think of all kinds of ways to be supportive to you. And in this week's podcast, one of the things I'm going to start is a segment on sustainability. I don't like the idea of doing more with less. And I know it sounds very attractive right now because it's really kind of a subject that's coming as the powers that be seem to be hell-bent on crashing an economy. But let me tell you why I don't like it. Because way back before 2008, when I was in the midst of raising children and my then spouse hadn't had a raise in 6 years and was capped on his salary because he was a government employee at the top of his pay scale. And we couldn't cut one more thing out. I was already doing more with less, and inflation was starting to build. You know, this was about 2005, 2006. And there was no cutting anything out of the budget because the kids were starting to hit a growth spurt. And it was tremendously stressful. And where we lived, there really weren't any jobs. Okay. And childcare was very expensive. And every time I crunched the numbers, it looked like I'd be paying to work. And it wasn't going to help our budget. It was just going to cost us money. So we were kind of damned if we did, damned if we didn't. So something had to give. And so, you know, I had already been the queen of meal planning, gardening, food prep, keeping my pantry full, buying in bulk, making what I could, crafty earth goddess. That was me. And the only thing left was bringing more in. So I started learning everything I could about using the internet to make a business. And I was like, even if it just pays for the kids' shoes. And, I wasn't shooting for $1 million. I was shooting for being able to pay for Taekwondo and art lessons, and maybe a little extra groceries. I wasn't being overly ambitious. I was literally going, how do we get by? And I think a lot of people can probably resonate with that right now. So I'll be talking about on the podcast, I'll be talking about strategies for during this energy, how you make the most of things and maybe allow a little more in. Okay. Abundance comes in all forms. I think a lot of times when people talk about the law of attraction, everybody thinks about winning the lottery. And of course, that is a rare event, and most of us probably will never win it. If that was possible, every psychic and every astrologer and everybody, we all would have won it by now, right? But there's many forms of abundance. There's many ways we can bring in just a little bit more. And the reason I'm going to be talking about this and sustainability, because it's not always about growth, it can be about sustainability, then we're able to take better action and able to secure ourselves a little bit better. Okay. And so that's what I want to talk about this week. We're going to finish up Black History Month talking about Octavia Butler and John Lewis, who I don't have a birth time for. And then I'm also going to talk about Rosa Parks because I've got a great biography for her and we have a birth time. And so I've had that request. The Patron-only podcast will have more as we load it up for the end of Black History Month. Next month, March, is Women's History Month, and we will include women from all walks of life and all different kinds of backgrounds to learn more about how the astrology expresses. And I've got a really fun way of doing it. I started it last week on the Patron Only podcast because I figured out something on my software that's kind of cool, where I can share the video, kind of like they do reaction videos, and kind of talk about it that way. So that's super cool. Of course, we're going to be talking about what's in the headlines. I'm going to give you a preview of what's in store for March. And I want to end the podcast after we talk about gardening and sustainability, since we're heading into, spring's just around the corner. I thought I'd leave you with a little bit of magic and how to make magic this week, because we have some really good transits for that. And I thought that would be very uplifting. And that's my goal for you guys as we move forward. There's enough crazy stuff going on and enough news out there to just get your adrenals pumping and make your head spin and make your heart sink. One of the best forms of resistance is finding your peace in the midst of the storm. And self-love and acceptance is a form of resistance. You're very hard to manipulate when you learn how to do that. So the more I can give to you to help you do that in these times, I think the better. There's other places that you can get freaked out on. I want to give you some things to look forward to every week. I need it too. So grab your favorite beverage. Well, get your matcha, get your tea, get your coffee, get your iced latte, get your Coke, whatever you're drinking. Okay? Whether we're driving to work together, and yes, we will find perfect parking, or we're on the way to the grocery store, we're taking the kids to school, or we're walking in the park, or folding laundry, or doing dishes, or, I don't know, tending the garden, depends on where you live, or shoveling some snow. We're doing it together. All right, let's get on with the episode. Hey, before I run down through the headlines, I want to talk about Venus retrograde with you today. So we know there is a no-buy stuff on February 28th. That's Friday, February 28th. Everyone is suggested to go buy your groceries, your gas, whatever you need to get on the 27th. And if you need to spend money, spend it on small businesses, not at like big corporate companies. There's a big difference between a small business and a big business. But it makes a huge dent if we're not using things owned by Visa to purchase with. Purchasing with cash, a little different. I find it very interesting that it happens the day before Venus is retrograde, which is on March 1st, at least in the United States. So, and Venus isn't really retrograde on the 1st. Venus stations on the 1st. Okay. And that means it appears to stop in the sky. That makes me think that this no-buy stuff is going to maybe be a little more impacted than past divestments and boycotts. Sometimes those are very effective, but like trying to get everybody not to do it. And the reason I know this is probably going to be a little bit more successful is, even though I had seen it all over the internet about a week ago, my dad looks at me and goes, we're not buying anything on Friday the 28th. My dad's almost 80 years old. Now, granted, he is no stranger to taking action. He was a shop steward. He's done collective bargaining. He's been active politically all of my life. And what isn't our first rodeo on not buying things in protest. But a lot of times it's hard to get a big group of people to do it. And when my almost 80-year-old dad has seen it online and says, you know what, we're going to take part in this. And I'm like, well, that was my plan too, Dad. Then I think, this one might have some teeth, especially since Venus is in Aries and is going to get personal, because it has been personal, right? With Venus in Aries, there's this very personal need for security, all right? And things are very relatable on a personal level when Venus is in Aries. And you're also starting to hear people from what many of my listeners might consider the other side saying, oh, wait, this is affecting my friends. This is affecting my family. This is affecting me, Venus in Aries. Instead of like understanding it's going to impact everybody. I'm not saying everybody with Venus in Aries is like that. Okay, I'm talking about the transiting energy. There's a big difference between transit energy and our personal makeup. In a personal chart with a personal Venus in Aries, it's just you like what you like. You have very strong preferences, okay? And you know what you don't like, period. Okay? You can be a very generous and warm-hearted person, but you have very clear preferences. On the transit, it's been about personal security and people feeling the threat of that as Mars in Cancer has been retrograde. Well, Mars is direct, and in Cancer, it's about security. Cancer's a sign that has to deal with security as well. All the cardinal signs do. Okay. And with Venus in Aries stationing Mars first, it's like putting the brakes on the economy, which is very interesting. And we know they want to shut down the government on the 13th. What's also very fascinating this week is we have a new moon in Pisces. Very fascinating. New moon in Pisces, setting intentions, dreaming into a reality we want to create, forming pathways, and I'll talk about that later at the end of the episode, right before Venus stations in Aries at 10 degrees. So it's still in that first decan of Aries. It's very primal needs: food, water, shelter. How do I keep myself alive? What do I bring to myself that keeps me thriving? Okay. And it's about to scooch back. A lot of the people I've talked about in Black History Month had Pisces placements. A lot of activists have Pisces placements. They understand that some issues are bigger than themselves because Pisces is our connection with the all that is, whereas Aquarius is understanding the collective, right? The physical collective. Pisces is understanding the great interconnectivity beyond the physical realm. Having Pisces, having Venus move back in Pisces as we go through March is going to be very curious. And we're going to see a lot of interesting things. Now, I'll go through this in the Patreon on what to expect with Venus retrograde, but let's just talk about it here for a minute. How can you use this retrograde energy? One, it's really, really important to get very, very clear about what matters to you. There have been many people who've been disrupted by the tech layoffs, by the federal layoffs, the illegal firings of employees, etc., breaching protocol, policy, etc. And your identity may feel threatened. Even, because they keep saying it was for performance, but it wasn't for performance. So many people had glowing reviews. So you're juxtaposed and you're shattered and you're wondering, who am I at this point? What am I going to do? There hasn't been needs taken care of. And so it's a time to review. I always say, feel the feelings. A lot of times people might misinterpret when I say, hey, we need to have a cool head. Doesn't mean you don't feel the feelings. You do. And then you get the cool head and you work through what matters most to you and achieving that. Okay. You may have had something very fulfilling. You may have had a position that gave you a sense of what I do matters. You may have had a sense of purpose. And yet your inherent worth is inside of you. And I know that's cold comfort when you're dealing with harsh realities. Yet this is the time. And you can really make some magic this week. And I'm not talking about becoming a sudden millionaire or having everything work out, but there can be things that appear almost miraculous. The right person at the right time, the right information. Somebody gets a hold of you with just the right thing, or somebody gifts you something, or somebody finds out about your situation and hands you a pot of soup. Those small things matter. They matter. You could have a stranger walk off the street or walk up to you on the street and say, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know, I don't know why I'm saying this, but there's something you really need to know about you, and you matter." You could have a smile on your face while you're walking down the street. You may not even be obviously depressed or worried, and it could come in. You could have messages. You could have dreams. You could have ideas and epiphanies. All of those things add up to something. And it's learning to listen to them instead of the outside noise, including your social and cultural conditioning. Like, I'm nobody without a job, or I'm never going to get ahead now. My life is always going to be trash. Nobody wants me. You could have old issues up for healing in regards to this. You're not going to get it all fixed in one heartbeat, in 1 second. Okay. But you can take a moment to kind of count what is working. Well, I don't have this going on, but I do have these things working in my favor. Okay. And put your focus there, because where our attention goes, energy does flow. The more we can move into a solution-oriented set of thinking during this Venus retrograde, the more we're able to find the pathways that will be most amenable for us, regardless of the outer chaos in the world. Okay. And there's going to be some chaos. I'm not going to lie. There's going to be some very interesting times ahead as we go through March. Pivotal times. Doesn't mean on a personal level, you can't end up with some of the most amazing stories of your life. Okay. Some of the hardest times in my life were also the most magical times of my life. I know it's possible, where things just kind of line up and work out against all odds. One time, my daughter looked at me as we were building together, a project, and she said, "Mom, we're the most dangerous people in the world." And I said, "Really?" And she goes, "Because we've had nothing and we know what to do with it. We're not afraid of it." I went, "You're right. We have. We've had it all, and we have had only each other. We have had it all, and we have only had each other." And there were times where we had to move apart for the sustainability of our individual selves, and then come back together. That was really hard, especially when there were times where all we had were each other, right? Life isn't about everything going our way. Life is about a range of experiences. And again, that is cold comfort when you're in the middle of it. I get it. I have more than once thrown rocks at a tree because I was frustrated by the way things were going in life. In fact, one time when I was about 25, and I had ticked off all the boxes. I had done everything you were supposed to do. Everything. And I was an overachiever. And life was falling apart no matter how hard I tried. No matter how hard I grasped, things were slipping through my hands. Like, it could feel like it was solid, and then it was like sand flowing through my fingers, whether it was my marriage, my career, even being a mother at that point it was all just one jumbled mess. And yet I'd done everything. that my society and culture had told me was what you're supposed to do. And I was miserable. And I wasn't miserable being a mom, but my marriage was falling apart and I wasn't happy with what I was doing for work at the time. And I had attained all these things that people said made you successful. And I went on this quest for understanding. And that's one of the ways astrology dropped into my lap. And it didn't make sense for quite a while. It didn't. That wasn't the sudden epiphany. I can tell you that. I ended up with a melty brain as I studied, especially that first year. But I found a used book in the one bookstore I could find English books at in Bahrain. And it was If You Meet the Buddha on the Road, Kill Him. That was the name of the book. And it's a Buddhist phrase. And the whole book was promising this immensely profound answer to life. And the guy detailed all these, different individual anecdotal stories. And I was like, okay, but give me the answer. And I'm reading through this book. And at the end, it's just like, and the answers are all inside of you. And I threw the book across my living room, which was long, and just it slammed against the wall. I was like, I yelled. I had such a temper. I yelled and I was like, if I had the answer, why did I read the freaking book? Again, that was at 25 when my world was falling apart. And I didn't feel like I knew a damn thing. I felt like everything I knew was a lie. That everything I had ever learned had holes in it. That nothing was factual. And everything, it was my great disillusionment, right? Many of you have gone through that in the last few years. And some of you are going through it now. Your great divine disillusionment, where the glamour of the world is stripped away and you see reality very differently, and it can be existential in scale on the crisis. The truth is, the answers always are inside of us, and I learned how to find them over the years, often by seeking counsel with other people, working with coaches and consultants, mediums and psychics and other astrologers, having friends to have conversations with, learning how to coach myself through these things. And that's why I share information with you. As Venus is retrograde, starting March 1st, it will be a time to seek those answers within, with your connection with the cosmos, with understanding the details of what matters most. Because as Venus will be retrograde, the first bit, while it's still in Aries, it will have a taste of Libra, which is justice. So it should be a little interesting. And as it slides back into Pisces, it will have a top note of Virgo. So as much as it's in Pisces and we can tune in to our connection with the all that is, it's also about the details and being very particular and not settling for less and not operating out of desperation, not just taking what you can get. Don't allow yourself to be a pawn in this economic game. Join together with others who have technical skills that meet yours. Not the same. You don't need it. Like 5 graphic designers don't need to pool together unless one's good at accounting and one is good at marketing, like writing copy. Another is good at forecasting and projections, and another is good at networking. You see what I'm saying? Maybe one is good at web design and one is better at making deliverables. Who knows? Now, if you've got a coalition together, you could form a team and share resources. I hope that sparks some ideas as we go forward. I look somewhat forward to seeing what transpires in this Venus retrograde. And if you feel like cutting your hair, cut your hair. It's hair. Okay. It's hair. It grows back. If the idea of a bad haircut sets you on edge, wait. But if you know it's just hair and it'll grow back, you should be all good. All right. We're going to do what's in the headlines. Then we're going to do some patron shout outs. And then we'll do our Black History Month segment. And then we'll talk about sustainability. All right, let's talk about what's up in the headlines this week. These are from the Awake Space Astrology magazine that is available in the Patreon. It's a tier for membership. And patrons at that level just got an introduction to transits and what, the actual astrology and what they are. So you guys can check that out. So February 23rd through the 25th, we have the moon in Capricorn bringing big booms and government scramble. People are fed up with leaders and it shows. Mars direct in Cancer has the people up in arms. So we could see historic events. It could be a mass casualty from a natural event, terrorist attack in a metro area, act of war, death of a leader or prominent figures, more than one event globally. That could happen on Monday, especially. We could see a big weather event could involve massive loss of life or infrastructure damage. We already saw something happen in South America with the collapse of like a shopping mall roof. Failed governments and countries with coalition governments, death of a world leader or former world leader. Issues with Iran could be war in Israel or could be issues in the Persian Gulf, including Straits of Hormuz. Issues erupt in the Straits of Taiwan and territorial waters of the Philippines. We saw that yesterday. Big event, historic event, could be violent storm or terrorism or political upset, erosion causing storms, tornadoes, hurricanes, changing temperatures, and hurricanes could be a cyclone as well, keeping an eye out on Australia. Thaws, freezes, or even more snow in lower elevations depending on location. We could see bombings, terrorist attacks, or explosion of some kind. It could be manufacturing as well. Obviously, it's not going to impact absolutely everybody. It's just stuff we're going to see in the headlines. We could see riots or civil unrest in Europe, UK, Australia, and the United States. Violent rhetoric or calls for violence. We could see legal matters, big lawsuits, and law enforcement news. This could do with the FBI or Secret Service. And they picked the head of the FBI. So there was that. Or their deputy anyway. Attacks on public figures or people of note, scandals regarding politicians and leaders, election violence potential in Germany. I don't believe there was any, but I haven't seen anything. Big infrastructure failure, in more than one place globally. NATO crisis could involve Turkey. Issues with oil pipeline, platform, or drilling operation at sea. We could see seismic activity increased up to a 6.5 or volcanic action offshore. That's global, like any active region. Leader deposed or coup d'etat or a world leader dies. Again, that could be Monday. Don't get your hopes up. Celebrity scandal or breakup, CEO or CFO removed from a position by board of directors or just removed. Accident on a mountain or at high elevation. Landslide, mudslide, rockfalls, sinkholes, or avalanches fall into that as well. February 25th through the 27th, the moon is in Aquarius. Things get a little weirder. It's hard to communicate. International tensions start to get very, very serious. Now remember, I read these at the end of every month, ahead of the month. So we could see big windstorms globally, issues with ocean currents, temperatures, ice storm or snowstorm, big rain or strange tides, and turbulence. We could see a solar storm or northern lights or both, a banking crisis, issues with payment gateways. And that's through the 27th. So I find it very funny that there's this, preparation for the not buying anything day. Communications failures, internet glitches, and hacking announced. We could see seismic activity above a 6.0 increase globally, all active regions. International coalition places sanctions on a major power. Financial crisis or dip in markets. We could see maybe a crypto crash, but we could see another dip in the stock market. Human rights and courts associated with human rights in the headlines, internet disruptions and satellite failures, huge protests in Eastern or Western Europe, probably like Eastern Europe. U.S. military withdrawal from Allied territory or threats to do so. Unseasonable temperatures and or extreme temps, either freezing or extreme heat, depends on where in the world you are. Icebergs, melting glacier, and sea ice, AMOC, and climate crisis could all be in the news. Fertilizer farm technology and land. Security concerns increased in major cities. EU and or NATO crisis. Surprise announcement regarding a political leader, figurehead, or an elected official. A merger not allowed to go through because of anti-monopoly laws. That would be a shock right now, wouldn't it? All markets volatile, including cryptocurrency. Power plant, chemical plant accidents, and or explosions. And I'm kind of looking at Ukraine for that. Tech sector volatile, issues with AI, and more layoffs in the tech sector. And then to wind up the week, we've got February 27th through March 1st. We have the moon in Pisces. Secrets are uncovered, and it's freaking wet. We could see cycling weather, which means like, when the clouds blow in and it just kind of, the storm hovers and just keeps dumping and doesn't really move out. We could see that. We could see big floods, heavy rains, devastating tides or rivers breach banks, levees and dams lose integrity. We could see that globally. Viruses and airborne illnesses in the headlines. And let's see, pharmaceutical companies and treatments, vaccines, and medicines, all of that could be in there. Issues with ports, marine transportation, accident at a port, toxic waste, radiation, and or nuclear power discussed. Water quality issues, sewers, and or waterborne illnesses. We could also see water mains break, etc. Issues with poisons or nerve agents or pharmaceutical matters. Potential terrorist attack, vehicular violence, or use of drones, increasing use of bombs, missiles, and expansion of war. In any current conflict, large civilian casualties are possible. Drug cartels, gangs, and state-sponsored activities could be mentioned. We could hear about cults, spiritual psychosis, visions, and religious experiences, and that would include in certain Christian sects of seeing demons and stuff like that. Everybody always thinks like Jonestown when it comes to cults, but they come in all flavors. Mass casualty event, pharmaceuticals, breakthroughs in treatment. So we could have good news. We could also see some really cool music or movies released. We could see information leaked, secrets revealed, scandals of all kinds. Whether it's through corporate and politicians, we could see cinema, film, or music release. We could see a world leader, religious leader, politician, or CEO fall ill or have sudden illness, a stroke, seizure, or poisoning. The CIA and Mossad or MI5 could be in the news and accused of something, or espionage and intelligence agencies or people just could be accused of being spies. We could see politicians under pressure, a particular wane under pressure and with a potential physical impairment or an attack on them. We could see dams and levees breach, severe weather, and big rain. So keep your eye on your weather. It's a little hard to see what's going on in the weather these days. But check your apps. Let's see, oil spills, oil platforms, issues with natural gas or other kinds of petrochemicals, including gas stations and depots, refineries. We could see issues with navies, oil tankers, or a big Navy ship has an accident, or a truck carrying volatile load has an accident, fire, explosion. Commodities and supply chain are up on deck. That's what we've got for in the headlines. Remember, there can be good news too, and we have to look for it. I think there's going to be some more cool archaeological news. I think you're going to hear more from anthropologists around matriarchies, and matriarchal societies, at least matrilineal societies. I think we might see women standing up in some really brave news. We might also see some religious figures doing the right thing. We could see more interesting acts of resistance out there, and we could see people looking after one another in community. Those are all things that we got to keep our eyes out for. There's as much, in fact, there's more good than there is bad in the world when we choose to put our eyes on it. When I'm making predictions about what's in the headlines, I'm literally looking at what is the mainstream media probably going to be talking about, either on the news, on the television, or in newspaper headlines. So there we go. Alrighty. Coming up next, we're going to do some patron shout outs. All right, before we get into patron shout outs, I thought I'd give some of the shenanigans that goes on in our Awake Space Lounge, which is part of our chats. We've got people are reporting how they feel right now with Mars having stationed direct. Let's see. This one, I'm trying to look for it. It's way up. You guys are so active. Kim got some really cool hair going on in time for a interview. Looking good, Kim. Boreal Maggie, not to be dramatic, but Mars direct today still feels like that scene in Lord of the Rings where Frodo and Sam are knocked out on the rock in Mordor and the eagles are about to show up to carry them out, just waiting for that eagle now. The eagles show up on the 25th. Okay. The amount of replies is cute. You know, people are like, yeah, it's heavy, but I love this reference. And yeah, it is. You know, it is heavy. And if we can find an inkling of humor, an inkling. I was telling people during the Mars Direct presentation that I gave, you know, look, if you can use gallows humor, dark humor, it's all something, anything to get you through. Okay. So, many people inspired by that. Some people got a burst of energy and they were painting and wallpapering and they felt creative. Other people are still kind of waiting for that energy lift. There's no wrong way to do this, guys. Everybody's different. I've felt a little buoyed, but my energy is still low. I know it's starting to pick up. It depends on what's going on for you in your astrological chart. So, Kate took a walk, a 12-mile hike, and saw 10 gators that didn't move. Gators, alligators, and showed pictures. Braver woman than I, Kate. Not only do I not wish to walk 12 miles, but in alligator-infested realms, good Lord, you brave person. And someone was a little bit worried about Venus and Mercury going retrograde at about the same time. Venus goes retrograde on the 1st, Mercury goes retrograde on the 14th, I believe. And isn't that a funny day for Mercury to go retrograde, considering it's the deadline for the U.S. budget? Yeah, isn't it? We'll see how that goes. We'll talk about that next week. But on a personal level, given your placements, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It isn't a time to rush forward. It's certainly a time to review. So there we go. Alrighty. And then many cute memes. The meme action is so strong. So let's give a shout out to our newest members. We have, and I'm going to attempt not to butcher people's names. All right. We've got Artayana, Smitten Jazz Kitten, Trisha, Kelsey, Tracy, JC, Martha, Jennifer, Allison, Flighty Girl, Juan, Sarah, Leah, Christine, Catalina, Alicia, Nicole, Taylor, Julia, Babs, Julie T, MC, Britt McGee, Sierra, Jazz, Maggie, Kierces. I thank you so much for putting a pronunciation guide. Farfully, Christian, Jamie, Kay, Bailey, Caitlin, Shreen, Jordan, Maddie, Suze, Victoria, Shawanda, Emily, Juliana, Heather, Shinny, Sarah, Sim, Natalie, Megan, Avian, Brandy, Stephanie, Caitlin, Morgan, Lucy, Shannon, Haley, Kelly, and another Haley, Kay, Heather, Elle, Katie, Utah or Juta, Beverly, Nikki Fox, Yasmin or Yasmin, D, Married to Jersey B, Amo, Kelly, MF, Allison, Casey or Cassie, Aretha, Annie, Rose, Athena, KJ, Matthew, Roni, Kendra, Rebecca, Brienne, Deb in California, Jean Jetta, Jessica, Michelle, Emily, Robbie, Sarah or Sarah, Genesee, Lisa, Ashley, Rachel, Aletha. I think I got it. Alethea. All right. Molly, Pink Widow, Veda, Diane, Diana, Bree from SD, Christine, Lisa, and Sky Bear. Thank you guys so much for becoming members. I appreciate you all. Oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. What a crazy time to be on the planet. There's some goodies coming up in March for you guys, so stay tuned. Alrighty, I think it's time for some Black History Month, and I'm excited about these charts, and I'm excited about how we're going to do this.
You grew up in Pasadena.
Mm-hmm.
How did you first become attracted to that type of writing?
Oh, I think I loved it because, I fell into writing it because I saw a bad movie, a movie called Devil Girl from Mars, and went into competition with it. But I think I stayed with it because it was so wide open. It gave me the chance to comment on every aspect of humanity. People tend to think of science fiction as, Star Wars or Star Trek. And the truth is, there are no closed doors and there are no required formulas. You can go anywhere with it.
The great, late Octavia Butler. A lot of people are drawn to Butler's work right now because she seemed to be a prophet. But we'll find out later after I look through her astrology what she has to say about that. So let's grab her astrology chart. I'm excited to do this kind of new format because when I put on the rest of that interview, I'll explain some of what we've seen in the astrology chart, which is exciting. All right. Once again, I'm using AstroSeek for the birth chart. We know that she was born on the 22nd of June, 1947 at 6:30 a.m. in Pasadena, Texas. Our dear Octavia Butler was a Cancer rising with Mercury in the first house. So her way of putting herself out there was with words and thoughts and ideas. She has Saturn. It just tucked into that first house. Saturn was sitting at 7 degrees of Leo, and her second house starts as so it was literally right on the line. So she had a lot of physical discipline and fiscal discipline. She kind of had a feast and famine kind of life as far as security goes, but highly, highly resilient. She was somebody who could kind of make a lot out of whatever happened. She had a Leo moon, which is interesting, like a very, very passionate. She couldn't ever work in something she wasn't passionate about. Like she would make money through her passions. Now, whether it made her wealthy or not was another thing, but it had to come from the heart. She was also probably really generous. she had Jupiter in Scorpio in the 5th house, which was retrograde, and so it acted a little bit like Taurus, but that depth, her creativity probably overtook her at times. And then with the Venus in Gemini, giving her a love of language and society itself, kind of almost like a love-hate relationship with society, with Mars in Taurus in the 11th and Venus in the 11th. Like, she was cheerleading for humanity and trying to inspire people to find solutions. And you'll hear that in that interview. It's very, very powerful and very strong. And then her Sun and Uranus in the 12th house. When you heard this opening of her saying there was no limits, that's that imagination in the 12th house with Uranus and the Sun there. The Sun in 0 degrees Cancer and Uranus in Gemini, making her a formidable figure, somewhat in need of solitude in order to recharge her batteries, but also very much carrying to channel, so to speak. And so I think instead of a prophet, we might say she was highly observant and able to kind of see the writing on the wall. I know a lot of people who are younger really see her as again a prophet, but the science was there back in the 80s, before she wrote. It was clear in the 90s. As somebody who was a young adult in the 90s, I can tell you very much that we knew about climate change. They called it global warming, unfortunately, because it gave people a stupid semantic argument. We knew what could happen. And she talks about that coming up next. And I think you'll be able to hear those placements, and I'll point them out here.
We're talking to Octavia Butler. Her latest book is Fledgling, wrote the Parable series as Katrina was happening, the aftermath of Katrina. A lot of people were talking about Octavia Butler and how the Parable series made them think about that. Explain.
I wrote the 2 Parable books back in the 90s, and they are books about, as I said, what happens because we don't trouble to correct some of the problems that we're brewing for ourselves right now. Global warming is one of those problems. And I was aware of it back in the 80s. I was reading books about it. And a lot of people were seeing it as politics, as something very iffy, as something they could ignore because nothing was going to come of it tomorrow.
That's that,
and
house.
The fact that I think I was paying a lot of attention to education because a lot of my friends were teachers, and the politics of education was getting scarier. It seemed to me we were getting to that point where we're thinking more about the building of prisons than of schools and libraries. And I remember while I was working on the novels, my hometown, Pasadena, had a bond issue that they passed to aid libraries. And I was so happy that it passed because so often these things don't. And they had closed a lot of branch libraries and were able to reopen them. So not everybody was going in the wrong direction, but a lot of the country still was. And what I wanted to write was a novel of someone who was coming up with solutions of a sort. My main character's solution is
that
grows from another religion again, that she comes prominent. Up with. Religion is
wanted to speak about
everywhere. There are no human societies without it, whether they acknowledge it as religion or not. So I thought
that Uranus
religion might be an answer as well as, in some cases, a problem. And in, for instance, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, it's both. So I have people who are bringing America to a kind of fascism because their religion is the only one they're willing to tolerate. On the other hand, I have people who are saying well, here is another religion, and here are some verses that can help us think in a different way, and here is a destination that isn't something that we have to wait for after we die.
Octavia Butler, could you read a little from Parable of the Talents?
I'm going to read a verse or two, and keep in mind these were written early in the 90s, but I think they apply forever, actually. This first one, I have a character in the books who is, someone who is taking the country fascist and who manages to get elected president. And who, oddly enough, comes from Texas. And here is one of the things that my character is inspired to write about this sort of situation. She says, "Choose your leaders with wisdom and forethought. To be led by a coward is to be controlled by all that the coward fears. To be led by a fool is to be led by the opportunists who control the fool. To be led by a thief is to offer up your most precious treasures to be stolen. To be led by a liar is to ask to be lied to. To be led by a tyrant is to sell yourself and those you love into slavery." And there's one other that I thought I should read because I see it happening so much. I got the idea for it when I heard someone answer a political question with a political slogan. And he didn't seem to realize that he was quoting somebody. He seemed to have thought that he had a creative thought there. And I wrote this verse. "Beware, all too often we say what we hear others say. We think what we are told that we think. We see what we are permitted to see. Worse, we see what we are told that we see. Repetition and pride are the keys to this. To see and to hear even an obvious lie again and again and again may be to say it, almost by reflex, then to defend it because we have said it, and at last to embrace it because we've defended it, and because we cannot admit that we've embraced and defended an obvious lie. Thus, without thought, without intent, we make mere echoes of ourselves, and we say what we hear others say." Just one more comment on the human condition, I guess.
Remarkable words from Octavia Butler. And it's funny because I did read her books way back in the 90s, and they just mirrored my own understanding of the world, because back in my youth, the people who were educated had these conversations. And she was able to so eloquently put these conversations into beautiful prose. All very relevant today as much as they were during that interview on Democracy Now! In 2005. And the fascist she was referring to was George W. Bush. And well, we've just ended up at the end game of that particular chess game that has been in play for quite a while. But Octavia Butler, strong voice, powerful voice, distinctive voice, strong and speaking with authority with that Saturn in the first house. I'll talk more about Octavia in the patron-only podcast, and we'll go through her biography then. For now, let's take a look at John Lewis and look at some good trouble. A very formidable gentleman, was born on February 21st of 1940. We don't have the time. He was born in Troy, Alabama. He had a Pisces sun and a Leo moon. We'll come down here. And I'm using astro themes for this chart because I couldn't find them anywhere else. I really encourage you, if you are in the BIPOC community and studying astrology, please collect charts. And if you find birth times, please keep a record. There has been a reflective focus on historical figures that meet the majority and less focus on those who would fall into the minority or marginalized. It has made it extraordinarily difficult to do this series any justice on historical figures. So do yourself a favor and collect your contemporaries so that people have it in the future. So we don't have a birth chart with accuracy here, but we can take a look at his placements. He would have been born at the beginning of Pluto in Leo. Whether or not he had a Leo moon depends on what time of day he was born. He could have had a Cancer moon. He was a Pisces with a Pisces Mercury. And then a whole lot of Aries going on. He had Jupiter and Venus, which conjunct would have made him very passionate about the things that mattered to him, especially his personhood. His Mars in Taurus made him stubborn, and that Uranus in Taurus would have made him a bit of a rebel, and a rebel towards social conformity. And I have a bit of a soundbite from him. Of course, he was born while Neptune was in Virgo. He passed away in 2020, I believe, which is a sad thing. He was known for saying it's okay to get into good trouble and to make good trouble. So we're going to take a look at that.
As a little child, I tasted the bitter fruits of racism, and I didn't like it.
This is why I'm saying he could have a Cancer moon.
I didn't like seeing those signs. I didn't like when I went to the theater. All of us little black children had to go upstairs to the balcony, and all the little white children went downstairs to the first floor.
Let's
well,
also
come on and
that
ask my mother,
Venus
my father, my
conjunct
grandparents,
Jupiter.
my great-grandparents. Why? They would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way. Don't get in trouble. But one day in 1955, 15 years old in the 10th grade, I heard about Rosa Parks. I heard the words of Martin Luther King Jr. on old radio. The action of Rosa Parks, the words and leadership of Martin Luther King Jr. inspired me to find a way to get in the way. And I got in trouble. Good trouble. Necessary trouble. As a student, in college, we studied the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence. We studied what Gandhi attempted to do in South Africa, what he accomplished in India. We studied Thoreau and civil disobedience. We studied the great religions of the world. And Andrew Iden will tell you in book 1, March book 1, we start sitting in, black and white college students, black and white high school students. Be sitting there in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion, waiting to be served. And someone would come up and spit on us. They'll put a lighted cigarette out in our hair or down our backs, pour hot water, hot coffee or hot chocolate on us, pull us off the lunch counter stools. We were orderly, peaceful. Many of us accepted nonviolence as a way of life, as a way of living. But we were charged with disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace. We got arrested. I went to jail the first time on February 27, 1960. Between 1960 and 1966, I was arrested and jailed 40 times. For sitting in, for going on a freedom ride, marching for the right to vote, beaten, at a Greyhound bus station in South Carolina, beaten at the Greyhound bus station in Montgomery, Alabama, and left bloody and unconscious. Beaten, having a concussion on that bridge in Selma, Alabama on March 7, 1965, a day that became known as Bloody Sunday. But I never became bitter or hostile, never gave up. I never gave in. I kept the faith, and during all these many years, I've tried to keep my eyes on the prize. Marge, Book 1. Tell a story of a group of people who stood up together, rested together, beaten together, and jailed together. Some of my friends didn't make it. They died. Today, this year, we celebrated, just a few weeks ago, the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. Back in 1963, August 28, 1963, I was the youngest speaker to March on Washington. And out of the 10 people that spoke that day, I'm the only one still around. So as we write Book 2 and Book 3, we will tell the whole story, the complete story of a people, of a struggle to make America different, to make America better, and create what we call one people, one family, one house. Because in America, we all live in the same house, the American house. And it doesn't matter whether we are black or white, Latino or Asian American or Native American. On this little planet, this little spaceship that we call Earth, we must learn to live together as Dr.
We could listen to the whole thing, but we'll do more of that in the patron-only podcast. But that was, I couldn't comment. I was busy listening. That good trouble. That was, you could hear that Aries, Venus, and that Jupiter together. I didn't like it. He could be a Cancer rising too, or a Taurus rising. The temerity of that Taurus Mars, unshakable. Having a Pisces Mercury, notice the eloquent thinker that he was and his connection to his faith and his unshakability in that knowingness. Never think having a Pisces Mercury is a bad thing. All right, let's take a look at Rosa Parks. Do these more justice in the patron-only podcast. And this was a patron request. Rosa Parks was born in Tuskegee, Alabama on the 4th of February, 1913. She was an Aquarius sun, a Capricorn moon, Aquarius Mercury, and also Venus in Aries, Mars in Capricorn, Jupiter in Capricorn, Saturn in Taurus, Uranus in Aquarius, Neptune in Cancer, and Pluto in Gemini. And I believe we do have a birth time. Yes, 5 in the morning, 5:12 a.m. So that's pretty cool to have that. Rosa Parks has a very interesting biography. I thought I would read from that for you. All right, reading the biography of Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was a civil rights activist, and she refused to surrender her seat to a white passenger on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama, sparking the Montgomery bus boycott that eventually ended racial segregation on public transportation. Born in February of 1913, Rosa Parks was a civil rights activist whose refusal to give up her seat to a white passenger on a segregated bus in 1955 led to the Montgomery bus boycott. Her bravery led to nationwide efforts to end racial segregation on public transportation and elsewhere. Parks was awarded the Martin Luther King Jr. Award by the NAACP, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and the Congressional Gold Medal. She has been described as the mother of the Civil Rights Movement. She died in October of 2005 at the age of 92. She was born Rosa Louise Macaulay on February 4, 1913 in Tuskegee, Alabama. Her parents, James and Leona Macaulay, separated when Parks was 2. Her mother moved the family to Pine Level, Alabama to live with her parents, Rose and Sylvester Edwards. Both of Rose's grandparents were formerly enslaved people and strong advocates for racial equality. The family lived on Edwards Farm, and this is where Rosa spent her youth. She experienced chronic tonsillitis as a child that often left her bedridden. After undergoing a tonsillectomy in the 5th grade, she experienced temporary blindness, but her health improved soon afterwards, according to Rosa Parks, A Life in American History by Darrell Mace. Early in life, Rosa experienced racial discrimination and activism for racial equality. Once her grandfather Sylvester stood in front of their house with a shotgun while Ku Klux Klan members marched down the street. Young Rosa often fought back physically against bullying from white children, noting, "As far back as I remember, I could never think in terms of accepting physical abuse without some form of retaliation if possible," according to The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks by Jean Thea Harris. Taught to read by her mother at a young age, Rosa attended segregated schools throughout her education. The one-room school in Pine Level where she went often lacked adequate school supplies such as desks. Black students were forced to walk to the 1st through 6th grade schoolhouse, while the city provided bus transportation as well as a new school building for white students. At age 11, Rosa began at the Industrial School for Girls in Montgomery, Alabama. She moved on to a laboratory school for secondary education led by Alabama State Teachers College for Negroes. That's what it was called. In 1929, Rosa left the school at the 11th grade to help both her sick grandmother and mother back in Pine Level. For a time, she worked at a shirt factory in Montgomery, but Rosa did eventually earn her high school degree in 1933. This was a significant accomplishment for a Black woman in the mid-1930s, during a time when 8 out of 10 Black children of high school age in the southern states weren't even enrolled in secondary schools, according to Rosa Parks, a biography by Joyce A. Hanson. In 1932, at age 19, Rosa met and married Raymond Parks, a barber and active member of the NAACP, as well as the League of Women Voters. The couple never had children, and their marriage lasted until his death in 1977. Raymond was involved with the Montgomery labor rights movement and led a national pledge drive to support the legal defense of the Scottsboro Boys, 9 Black teenagers falsely accused in Alabama of raping 2 white women in 1931. As Rosa's own interest in civil activism rose, Raymond discouraged her from actively participating in the Scottsboro Boys' defense efforts due to the dangers involved. Rosa said her husband believed, "It was hard enough if he had to run. He couldn't leave me, and I couldn't run as fast." According to The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks, she didn't let that stop her. After graduating high school with Raymond's support, Rosa became actively involved in civil rights issues by joining the NAACP's Montgomery chapter in 1943, serving as its youth leader, as well as secretary to the NAACP President E.D. Nixon. She held the post until 1957. During her time at the NAACP, she was involved in investigating the gang rape of Reese Taylor, a Black woman in Henry County, Alabama. Parks also attended meetings to discuss the murder of Emmett Till, a Black teenager who was tortured and lynched after being accused of offending a white woman in Mississippi in 1955. After a long day's work at a Montgomery department store where she worked as a seamstress, Parks boarded the Cleveland Avenue bus for home on December 1st of 1955. She took a seat in the first several rows designated for, quote-unquote colored passengers. The Montgomery City Code required that all public transportation be segregated, and that bus drivers had the powers of police officer of the city while in actual charge of any bus for the purposes of carrying out the provisions of the code. That meant drivers were required to provide separate but equal accommodations for white and black passengers by assigning seats. A line roughly in the middle of the bus separated white passengers in the front from black passengers in the back. When an African American passenger boarded the bus, they had to get on at the front to pay their fare, then get off and reboard the bus at the back door. As the bus Parks was riding continued on its route, it began to fill with white passengers. Eventually, the bus was full, and driver James F. Blake noticed that several white passengers were standing in the aisle. Blake stopped the bus and moved the sign separating the two sections back one row, asking for passengers to give up their seats. The city's bus ordinance didn't specifically give drivers the authority to demand a passenger to give up a seat to anyone, regardless of color. However, Montgomery bus drivers had adopted the custom of moving back the sign, separating black and white passengers, and if necessary, asking black passengers to give up their seats to white passengers. If the black passenger protested, the bus driver had the authority to refuse service and could call the police to have them removed. 3 of the other black passengers on the bus complied with the driver, but Parks refused and remained seated. Blake demanded, "Why don't you stand up?" To which Parks replied, "I don't think I should have to stand up." He called the police and had her arrested. Parks later said of the incident, "When that white driver stepped back towards us, when he waved his hand and ordered us up and out of our seats, I felt a determination cover my body like a quilt on a winter night." The police arrested Parks at the scene and charged her with a violation of Chapter 6, Section 11 of the Montgomery City Code. She was taken to police headquarters, where later that night she was released on bail. Parks' protest made her the public face of what later became known as the Montgomery bus boycott. The evening that Parks was arrested, E.D. Nixon began forming plans to organize a boycott of Montgomery city buses. Members of the black community were asked to stay off city buses on Monday, December 5th, 1955, the day of Parks' trial, in protest of her arrest. People were encouraged to stay home from work or school, take a cab, or walk to work. Ads were placed in local papers, and handbills were printed and distributed in black neighborhoods. In fact, Parks wasn't the first to push back against segregated busing practices. A 15-year-old nurse aide and activist named Claudette Colvin had similarly refused to surrender her bus seat to a white passenger's 9 months before Parks had done so, but the NAACP felt Parks was the better candidate to highlight to the public, and so Colvin's actions remained relatively unknown. Colvin later said she wasn't publicized because she was a pregnant teen, and because Parks was more fair-skinned and had the look that people associate with the middle class. On the morning of December 5th, a group of leaders from the black community gathered at the Mount Zion Church in Montgomery to discuss strategies and determine that their boycott effort required a new organization and strong leadership. They formed the Montgomery Improvement Association, electing Montgomery newcomer Martin Luther King Jr. as minister of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. The MIA believed Parks' case provided an excellent opportunity to take further action to create real change. When Parks arrived at the courthouse for trial that morning with her attorney Fred Gray, she was greeted by a bustling crowd of about 500 local supporters who rooted her on. Following a 30-minute hearing, Parks was found guilty of violating a local ordinance and was fined $10 as well as the $4 court fee. Inarguably the biggest event of the day, however, was what Parks' trial had triggered. The city's buses were by and large empty. Some people carpooled, other people rode in black-operated cabs, but most of the estimated 40,000 African-American commuters living in the city at the time had opted to walk to work that day, some as far as 20 miles. Due to the size and scope of and loyalty to the boycott, the effort continued for several months. The city of Montgomery had become a victorious eyesore, with dozens of public buses sitting idle. ultimately severely crippling finances for its transit company. With the boycott's progress, however, came strong resistance. All right. I'll put the article in the podcast notes. One of the things that has often been used is she was tired. She didn't want to get up. In Rosa Parks' words, and I can't remember where I found this. I Google biographies of her because it's on one in the top 10 on your searches. She said, "I wasn't any more tired than I was any other day, other than I was tired of being moved." And those are the people who have paved the way, asking for common decency. Hardly a radical notion. And going back to her chart, let me just grab that real quick. And of course, did I just take off my reading glasses? Yes, I did. I want to point out she had a Capricorn rising with Mars just tucked into that 12th house, applying to her ascendant with her Capricorn moon. She could be stubborn. Okay, she was kind of done with it all. I like it, the rebellious life, and some of that rebellion being that bit of Aquarius in that first house. In fact, she had Aquarius intercepted in the first house, and I believe, yes. Is it? No, it's not. It's not intercepted. Sorry. My eyes are so tired. So she had a Capricorn with a great amount of Aquarius with Uranus there, and her Sun and her Mercury. She took no prisoners. I'm sure she had a very unique way of communicating her point of view, and probably spoke pretty matter-of-factly, especially since she had an Aries third house, with her Venus also being in Aries, much like John Lewis's. So remember what I was saying earlier in the podcast. It's not a bad thing to have Venus and Aries. You have very strong preferences, personal preferences, and you prefer your person to be valued. Nothing wrong with that. All right. I'm going to take a quick break, and then I'm going to come back, and we're going to talk about that new moon in Pisces. And we're going to talk about how you can make some magic this week. I'm going to do a special event for patrons. So all supporting patrons will do a new moon meditation and set some intentions together. But we'll talk about what you can do for your intentions coming up next. Well, it's time to make some magic. We've got the moon coming new this week on the 27th in Pisces, and that is as good as any time to get things started, both setting your intentions and getting your garden ready. It is absolutely okay to start gardening small. I spoke about that with one of our patrons, Sam. We did a little chat about small space gardening. I mentioned earlier in the podcast that I had my Earth Goddess phase, and I spent a lot of time gardening. In fact, it was one of the ways I found peace when I was deep in my healing journey, walking through the swamp of healing trauma. And I thought I had a brown thumb before that. Like, my parents were big gardeners. I grew up with a garden, but I hated gardening as a kid. My parents made it like hard work. And we had a more traditional garden. There were rows and monoculture, like carrots went here and corn went there and blah, blah, blah. And it hurt my back, and I got hot and sweaty, and it just seemed like my parents got like more and more excited the harder they worked, and like exhausted themselves. And I sat back and went, that is no way to live a life. I don't know if it was my Libra moon or what, but I'm like, are you sure? Although my mother has a Libra moon, and she loves it. But she also has a Taurus Venus and a Sun, and for her, getting in and getting physical was super exciting. I have a Sagittarius Mars. There has to be a quest involved. And so years and years, I tried to grow some houseplants. They all died. I mean, I killed ivy. Who kills ivy? Me, I do. So, fast forward, I was about 30, and one of my dear friends was an amazing gardener, and she had a joy in her gardening that was different than getting approval for hard work or excitement in the actual gritty sweatiness of it all. She had a relationship with her plants. I was like, that's cool. And I learned about co-creative gardening, where you tune in to the consciousness of the plant. And that all sounded crazy back in 1999. But today, scientists have actually proved that plants have a consciousness. It's different than our consciousness, but it's there. And I was like, well, of course it is, because I've co-created in gardening and out in nature for, almost as long as I've been an astrologer. To start out, I just picked some plants that sounded fun to grow. Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Believe it or not, the parsley was the hardest thing out of that to germinate, and it should have been the easiest. I gave away rosemary plants for probably 15 years. You don't have to do that. And when I first started gardening, it was just small. I kept the rosemary small. I kept them in small pots. I limited their growth because we were moving quite a bit. In fact, in the year 2000, we shifted house 6 times. And it wasn't necessarily 6 different locations. It was just where it was 3 locations. It was a lot of back and forth. It was a nutso time. And you can't just move plants all over the place if they're in big pots. So I kept things small. And I kept it to the things I liked to cook with. When we moved to Camino Island, I had time. And I had actually really good loamy, sandy soil when we first moved there. And I built up a 1930s cottage garden. I did a lot of research. Again, the quest. I did a lot of investigation. I grew things I liked to eat. I had a 100% edible garden because I had little children and I didn't want them to put anything toxic in their mouth. So they could literally graze through the garden any time of year because I had a lot of perennials that could handle the weather there and lots of herbs of different kinds. I had different kinds of mint, and I had this lasting nasturtium. They're not supposed to. They're like an annual. That means they grow, once a year. But I had this one spot where it was just so happy. It never died. It was incredible. Learning to garden was both an experiment, an act of meditation, and a way to help my family. And make sure my kids were eating good food. No, I didn't supply all of our daily calories through this little garden I created, nor ever when I had a big garden. It supplemented us and sometimes made the difference during the hard years, especially when it came to good, strong, leafy greens, spinach and kale and Swiss chard and arugula or rocket, call it what you will. Growing melons. Well, actually, I grew squash more than melons. I didn't really have the climate for melons. It just wasn't the right growing season. Berries of all different kinds. And I would buy produce, in bulk from farmers because we were rural and it was easy to access. But I even drove quite a ways away, half the state away, to get to a certain crop because I could get good deals on it, and it was worth the gas money. As we head towards this Pisces new moon, instead of leaning into that which we lack and that which we feel is taken away, treat life like a garden and start planting some seeds. Most of the time I was gardening, we didn't have a lot. We were on pretty much a fixed income. given my then husband's job and life circumstances and economies. My garden was a place to dream. I used to dedicate a plant to an idea or even a person and tend the plant. And some of those fruits from those plants are just now starting to ripen, but they were first tended in my garden. New moons are always a time to plant seeds, so it would be great if you're working with hydroponics, and that could just be a little countertop garden to put in, again, leafy greens, lettuce, watercress grows really easy, and you can companion plant with it. You don't just have to do one thing. You want to think about the growing habits of the plants and maybe watch some YouTube videos by people who do permaculture, container gardening, hydroponic gardening. You don't need a big fancy setup. You can start small. You can start with just one plant. You can hear Sam and I talk about gardening in small spaces in the Patreon-only podcast this week. And I'm excited to share that with you. And Sam was gracious enough to share a bunch of photos of their garden in our Patreon. And gorgeous and very creative. But if you don't want a garden, this is a great time to sit down with some music and write down and dream into what you want to create. It's so easy to allow the outside world to interfere with your inner world. We can effect change in the outer world by finding our peace, by understanding our value, by falling in love with ourselves. Because if you don't love yourself, it's very, very hard to truly be in a loving relationship with anyone. And love isn't egotistical. It's understanding that as somebody who had a 1 in 400 trillion chance of being human, you are automatically priceless. You are beyond valuable. That's not just a shtick. It's a fact. It's a mathematical fact. Regardless of what other people out there are saying about you or about people like you or about people who are adjacent to you, it doesn't take away from the fact you have value. This new moon in Pisces is a great time to plant seeds of hope and faith versus tending a weed patch of fear. And we can inoculate ourselves against fear with our faith, much like John Lewis was talking about in that speech that you just listened to. There has to be a knowingness and a connectedness, even without evidence. And if enough of us do it, like a collective dynamo, we generate enough energy to move things in a better direction. If you're a patron, we'll be going through the new moon and what it means for setting intentions in your birth chart, knowing where it's falling in the birth chart and how you can best take advantage of it. We'll do a little meditation as well later this week. But you simply can sit down with whatever inspires you. You can draw, you can paint, you can sing, you can strum a guitar, you can doodle, you can play with your deck of cards, you can get your hands in the clay. You start sketching a garden plan. Now is a good time. It's as good as any to make future plans. because to make future plans means there's hope. And for all the talk of Pandora's box being open, everyone seems to forget what was left in the box. Hope. And hope remains. I hope you have a beautiful week, and I look forward to speaking to you next week.